So, hello and welcome, one and all. You are tuned in to Frivolous Gravitas with myself, Christopher Driver. Alongside me today is a very special guest, Justin Hanischuk, my way hetero life partner, and just to steal some verbiage from Kevin Smith. So, before we start, just a little about my friend here. Justin's been professionally circumnavigating the proverbial block with specialization in the hospitality industry, sporting over 10 years, managing food and beverage service and watering holes from the West Coast all the way to Winnipeg here, where he now hails his home. His expertise is exposure to human interactions in social settings, both by managing the back end of business operations and staff, as well as customers and groups he served over the years. So today we're going to examine the roots and binding ties of our interpersonal relationships, not just Justin and I, but broadly speaking of all peoples. We'll see if we can unearth some fundamental ideas about social life to see if we can identify commonalities between cultures, personal evolutions of concepts like friendships as we live and grow, and we'll try to analyze some of the core components and roles that maturity plays in our social development as individuals. So we're going to dive into friendships at first, I think, and maybe move on to concepts of love and hate too as we carry on from there. But just to get us started, let me ask you, Justin, what do you think is the definition or explanation of what we might consider friendship, assuming there may be some differences between cultures depending on who's listening and where they come from?
I mean, in broad terms, I feel like it is just the link up between two like-minded people. It starts out on a very superficial level, obviously, like what are your interests, baseline. And then from there, it kind of evolves into more of a bond over time through experiences and hardships and good times, whatever. That classic adage, good times and bad times. But the true friendships are the ones that aren't based on the whimsical, like if I'm having a bad time in life, those are the friends that tend to just kind of disappear. Oh, I can't handle this, I don't know what you're talking about, I don't want to help you, I have no compassion towards your situation, etc., etc. The real friends have a shared empathy. I think empathy is the most important thing with friends, and I think that's where true friendship starts, is to develop empathy for the other person, not just sympathy.
Do you want to dig into that a little bit? Like, what do you think empathy means in this context?
In regards to having your thinking outside of yourself when you put the other person before you,
Like their
like when
perspectives, their backgrounds, their biases, all that, right?
Everything, yeah. And then when that you run into issues or problems or what have you in the friendship, not in your internal life, but in your friendship, then those are the tests where you develop those bonds more thoroughly, and through not fighting, I wouldn't say fighting, but even argumentative debates or what have you. You really learn to appreciate their point of view because it's not your own, and I think it helps you grow as a person fundamentally.
Well, as an extension from that, I think that's a good point and place to branch off from. When you talk about like conflict being sort of a source of strength in growth between a bond or a friendship or what have you, what types of conflicts would you be looking for? Like, is that something you might want to instigate intentionally with purpose, or you just let it happen with time? Or
well, the conflicts present themselves in millions of different ways, but I mean, I wouldn't go out of my way to look for a conflict in a friendship. It's kind of counterintuitive to the bond.
yeah, a little bit, eh?
A little bit, but I mean, sometimes you need those differences to be ironed out, because if you don't get in these, because you're gonna eventually, it's just inevitable to have disagreements with people, to feel hurt or something that happens. But it's I wouldn't say it's a good thing to go looking for it, but I mean, when it happens, that's like I said, it's like when you know that the other person is there for the long haul. When you can just get past it and say, okay, that's their point, this is mine. Um, it may not jive with exactly what I believe in or what have you, but I still respect them, and you just move on.
So, with that in mind, then, when you have conflict between two people and that strengthens a tie, what's the difference between that type of conflict that breaks a bond and the type of conflict that strengthens one? Is it just a dichotomy between the two where you veer one way or the other? Or is there some kind of, well, it can strengthen it a bit, but also weaken it a bit at the same time? Like, is it part of a spectrum, do you think?
Well, I mean, if you look at a friendship level of a spouse, because you have to be friends before you're married. That's the strongest bond you have in life, I think, is if you get married, besides your best friends and whatnot. But look at divorce. I mean, that's a one-way street. That's a complete breaking of the bonds you've made. There's that kind of there's no coming back from something like that. And I'm only equating that to friendship, obviously. In those terms, I mean, obviously, a marriage is a lot more complicated than just being friends with someone. But I mean, that is a baseline of any good marriage.
You think there
But
are amicable divorces?
no, sure, I'm sure that people just spend too much time away from each other, whether it's for work or travel. They just lose the love they used to have, or they've had kids and they just drift apart, or there's like, I don't know, there's a million reasons why people's marriage fails. Not everyone ends in a disaster. I mean, people just decide competently and respectfully to just bow out when they should, instead of just prolonging something and being miserable for years and years afterwards.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
So getting back to when we were talking about the roots of the friendship and everything, and the
Okay.
conflict sort of being part of the bond that strengthens, and empathy being a requirement, setting yourself in the other person's shoes emotionally, not just from your
Right.
perspective if you were them, but actually as them. How does that grow? Like, is it something that needs like cultivation and manicuring and like cleaning up and maintenance and effort and work, or can it just grow organically just from proximity and routine?
That's really tricky because everyone's situation is different. I mean, you could have a friendship where that's all you have is proximity, and you just known them for X amount of time, and you just have you're like furniture in their lives. Um, so I suppose if you really wanted to have a real friendship where there's support and you can talk to them about anything, et cetera, et cetera, you would, there is a certain amount of cultivation and time you would need to put into it. You can't just willy-nilly hope for the best when you meet someone, oh, maybe after 6 months we'll be best buddies. Like, it doesn't work like that. You need
No.
to, constantly kind of, poke and prod for, the past and all their opinions, beliefs, dreams, ambitions. I mean, I would love to say that friendship is organic, but at the end of the day, it does require two people to put in effort to meet halfway. If one person's
Or-
putting in all the effort, the other person's like, yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that I think might stem a little bit into compatibility, right? When you have
Well,
two.
yeah. And friendship is a little bit more complicated for compatibility than, let's say, like a relationship, in my opinion, like meeting a significant other, because that is physical right away. You're attracted to that person. Like a friendship, you don't necessarily have a physical attraction to them, per se, but I mean, like, it's more of a mental to start.
Yeah. Or I find even mannerisms, like I'll be attracted to types of people
Right.
that sort of behave in certain ways that are not necessarily gregarious, but just even if they have weird tweaks like me, that I relate to that sort of.
Right. That would be part of the empathy, I think, because you're relating to something. You can already manifest yourself in their shoes, and you can already see where they're coming from because you share those kind of characteristics and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I guess it makes the empathy a lot easier then.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
it's definitely it's like instead of having like a dirt path between you, there's just to start out, you already have a bridge. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, there's so many different levels to build upon. To answer your question, yeah.
Okay, so when you're like at work in your old professions, and so like you and I'll just give a little quick recap of our
Sure.
history. We moved out to BC together, and you were attending bar, and I was working in office, and we'd usually, well, whether commiserating or just communing, we would gather at a watering hole, you and I, and just have drinks with whoever was around, kind of thing. What role do you think, like drugs or alcohol or external factors like food, for instance, is a huge social component? I find people are a lot more agreeable and affable when they're eating. Do you think
Or
there's like a
drinking.
human psychological component to the environment as we're building or developing a friendship or finding one?
Well, to quote Guy Vanderhee with his Scotch, it's called social lubrication for a reason.
Yeah.
So, um,
Does that mean we're
yeah,
naturally inhibited though? Like we naturally don't want friends or what?
I think it's a matter of letting your guard down easier. I don't think it's necessarily like you're not trying to actively seek out friendship and stuff like that because deep down we have a need to be social. Like we're social creatures. We started in tribes. We started being that way ever since the dawn of time for us as a species or whatever. But I think it's definitely a needed thing. In terms of drinking and drugs and stuff like that, I mean, I don't think it's necessary, but it definitely kind of speeds things. It kind of puts the friendship on an exponential growth because you have the time is condensed and your inhibitions are down, and so you're willing to share a lot more than you normally would. How about?
Mm. So connecting to people sort of has a reliant component of vulnerability to it. Like you have to be exposed in order to receive that type of
Yeah,
connection.
you have to be. I mean, if you're just going to be a clam, you're not going to really going to glean too much from the other person if you're just a closed door. Yes or no answers, like it's just there. That's no way to. So,
Okay, well, in keeping with that thought, then I'd like to ask you about like other environmental conditions that relate or either enhance or restrict people's ability to form those tight bonds. So, friendships at work, for example, you've got the shared workspace. Do you want to speak on that a little bit, like how work affects the way humans relate to each other, working shoulder to shoulder?
well, yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I really appreciate work relationships because it is a work relationship. It's not like a traditional friendship, quote unquote, unless you actually develop that outside of work, obviously. But it's a lot more safe, in my opinion. You don't have to put in as much. It's a really casual relationship. So it's easier to just kind of pick it up and put it down. You know what I mean? If you work together, you work together that day. If you don't, you don't. You know what I mean? It's not like you're so it's a lot slower paced because you very slowly over time develop a stronger relationship with coworkers, but that because you're not in your free time and you're constantly at work and you're half focused on work and half focused on building that kind of thing on the side, it's a lot slower. I think I personally am a lot more guarded at work. I don't like to share a lot with my coworkers unless they ask just general questions. I stopped getting involved with people I work with now,
So,
debates and stuff. It is comforting though.
you were mentioning a bit about like a safety portion or like when we were speaking about forming the friendships and how work is a bit more guarded than regular friendships, but like to build a friendship you need to let your guard down, but at the same token, to work productively you can't just be exposing your emotional connections to everybody, because everybody at work obviously is going to be impacted, and it's going to maybe cause friction or whatever, like people dating at work, that kind of thing. So given that you're working next to people and you have some common goals and common structures and you have easy chit chat because you have the shop to talk about, right? How does that different from a friendship from that you just meet at a bus stop or in a park walking your dog or something like that? Like what's the difference in the friendship? Is there like a categorical difference?
Well, put it to you this way. Yeah, put it to you this way. If you have ever, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but if you ever talk to people a lot at work and then ever have any kind of hangout outside of work, what do you wind up talking about most?
Work, but I love work. I'm weird.
That's what I'm saying. So your fundamental building blocks from a work relationship is the work itself. It's very rare for me anyway that I've actually made real long lasting friendships from just work, because you have to move past that barrier of, okay, we have something else to talk about besides work. But that's always what you wind up talking about. So I don't know. I've always treated those work relationships as just that, and I've never really tried to expand on them too much, unless in this circumstance where I was doing my old job where I used to bartend and I'd have regulars and then I would hang out with them outside of work. And obviously I'm not going to talk with them about work because they don't work with me, right? So we automatically are skipping that part, and I am automatically skipping and bypassing some of the getting to know you stuff because they already have been coming to me for 2 years at that point. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, so you can
that part
skip
is a
the
little
foreplay
easier.
and you can jump sort of ahead at the
Exactly.
same
Get right to the sex.
time.
Except not sex, I'm just saying. Is a figure of speech.
Sexy figure of
But
speech.
yeah, no, it's complicated though. I mean, like, relationships are complicated. Friendships are very, I don't know, they're very complicated, and you can't just pick up a person and put it down like a toy. You know what I mean? That takes time, and when you're not in the picture, their life still exists and time still goes on, for them. So
Well, that,
it requires a certain amount of tenacity, I think.
yeah, and I think that's a good segue into like maintaining friendships, like rather than just building them, maintaining them. Some require more work than others, obviously, but in my experience, I don't know if you've experienced this, but there are times when I try to form a friendship with somebody, but their intensity level doesn't match mine. Whether it's I want to be more with them or talk to them more often, or they want to talk to me too often and I just want to stand back a bit. What kind
Right.
of dynamics like that do you think play into like everybody's general social engagement? That
Well, I mean, I was just gonna,
standoffishness versus like my distance versus your distance kind of thing.
yeah, and I was just gonna bring up the point of personality traits as a segue from that, because if I'm an introverted person, which I am in general life, and I meet a very gregarious, outgoing person who is all about having huge social circles and knowing 10 or 12 people and whatever, I feel like um, that those dynamics play a huge integral role in the way that you're forming those relationships as well. Because if I understand you to be a very loud, in your face, uh, you're open. Usually, those people are very open with their lives, almost to an embarrassing level. I'm going to stand back automatically because I can already see that you're not matching what I'm going for. I am a lot more. Um, I don't want to say the cliche of down to earth, but I mean, I don't really know any other way to put it. But I automatically will just stand back from that because I cannot deal with that amount of energy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're looking for more of a
So
sedated
yeah,
interaction between
I
people.
can't. Yeah, so if I'm in the mood to, like my old friend from way, way, way back, if I'm in the mood to go out and party, and if I'm in the mood to socialize and all that, those are the people I want around. But slowly over time, I have come down and down and down and down notches and notches with that. So I just am not looking for that type of uh, person anymore. It's too much. So yeah, I think in general sense, when people are looking for those types of things, that's the first thing that goes through their head, I think, is does this person match my, that you, like you said, your energy level or what have you.
Yeah. So is that something that you think we should be trying to compromise for? Like, is that a personal fault that I should be trying to extend myself further into someone else's domains to more relate to them? Or is
And
it
I've
just
I've
matter of fact that's how it is? We should just accept it kind of thing.
I've thought about this a lot, and honestly, like I at this age, I mean, maybe 10 years ago you asked me this question, I might have a totally different answer. But at this age, I feel I'm not going to go out of my, I'm not going to call it a safety bubble because it's not a safety bubble. I understand where my borders are, but I'm not going to go out of my way to placate to someone else's wants and needs if they're at that level and I'm just not, if that makes any sense. I'm
Yeah,
not
so
going
you're
to,
saying instead of compromising your ability to distinguish what you do want out of life and what you want out of a friendship means that you don't have to overextend yourself trying everything that's guaranteed sort of not to work. If
right. And that's
yeah,
not to say that I'm not going to put in the effort if I do meet someone who is compatible, but if, especially if they're a very uh loud and obnoxious even, or like I said, they just tell their life story to you or whatever else like all at once, it's just too much. So no, I'm not going to compromise in that regard. I will in other regards, like if let's say like if I'm just not feeling that well one day, I'm still going to push myself to go out and see them because it means something to them and me, and you know what, that kind of thing. But in regards to having those personality conflicts, no, I'm not going to compromise on that. I'm just, like I said, I'm too old for that. I couldn't be bothered, honestly, if as sad as that sounds,
no,
or as
it's honest though,
harsh
and
as that sounds, I
that's the
guess.
hard part about sort of analyzing these types of things is being able to be honest about just your wants and your needs, like what you consider more valuable than others with regard to your time and your energy. I think that's a process of maturity that I sort of want to get into a little bit later. So it's good that you mentioned that as a bookmark for some foreshadowing. But before we go to that, I would just like to sort of pick at
Yeah.
you a little bit more on the what do you call that, the impetus that you have to put into friendships, like choosing which ones to maintain and which ones to compromise for, and balancing, I guess, is what I'm talking about, because most people have more than one friend, so balancing your group of friends might be the next place I'd like to ask you. Just based on what you've seen, even from people coming in as customers, you'll see groups of all kinds, and every now and then you'll probably see one person with a different group, and you'll
Yep.
recognize the dynamics kind of thing. What do you
Like
think?
this is, yep.
Sorry.
Um, yeah, I mean, I definitely saw it all the time. I'd see the regular group hanging out, and just one day in like a month, I'd see just this one guy out of that group with one other guy because they're not part of that group, right? It's a totally different circle of friends that he's with, or the one friend, it just doesn't have that many friends, kind of like me. I don't really, so I find it really easy to balance because I have so few contacts that I care to stay close to. Besides family, obviously, sister, mom, dad, you know, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
brother, whatever. But I just I feel it very lackadaisical even for me to continue that because I just don't have to worry about so many different people in my personal life. But I mean, for other people, for someone who is outgoing and stuff like that, I feel like they probably are so used to playing the hop, skip, and jump around their group and to all these different people that it's almost like it gives them a charge. Like this person gives me this and this person gives me this. Like we were talking the other day, we were sorry to catch you folks up. We were talking about the idea of polyamorous friends in regards to social settings and social groups, which actually is a really interesting way of putting it, because that's essentially what. And I hate to keep bringing up outgoing people because obviously introverted people have always classically been more of the I'm gonna only have a couple of really good friends and I don't really talk to that many other people. So I'm only speaking of outgoing personality types, but I mean I find it interesting that they can bounce around so much and kind of have that freedom to explore all of these different avenues and opinions and viewpoints. But at the same time, I would just be so exhausted at the end of the day, I couldn't handle it.
Can you
But
speak
I
a little
mean,
bit
yeah,
more about that though? Like the
how's
polyamorous
that?
friendship discussion that we were having before?
Oh, I mean, so I mean, if you take a polyamorous actual relationship, you're talking about having multiple partners, maybe kids thrown into the mix with whoever. So all
Romantic
it is,
partners we're talking about.
right, romantic partners. So all it is kind of taking that concept and applying it to your friend circles. So if you have, especially with my one other friend, he's very in need of having multiple friendship partners, if you will. um, and he needs those five, six, eight people in his life on a circle on a cycle to kind of give him all the needs that he needs from one friendship, to kind of fulfill all of his needs, as opposed to just a couple of very close niche people that will fill one half and one half, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
he's basically giving each person has like an eighth of what he needs for one friendship,
And you put that very well
which I
because that.
think is, yeah.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
you
Yeah.
cut out a little bit
Yep.
there.
Oh, sorry. I'm just gonna make another coffee. Should I put you down or should I
Yeah.
just continue?
No, that's whatever you want.
Okay.
You can keep me around.
I don't really care. It's just dishes.
But going on to that is because I sort of felt for most of my life I was like that. So each of my even my closest friends are sort of only like an eighth, like you said, of my interests and my passions and my pains and my experiences and all that.
But
Um,
your way of life is a little mixed though, because you started out having the needing those multiple people to kind of um, fulfill all those needs, but you've kind of grown into more of an introverted friendship level where you can't deal with all those people anymore, right? It seems like
yeah, and
anyway.
that's sort of what fascinates me about it is like I can't really pinpoint where that evolution occurred and what caused it or how long it took to become from one to the other. Because
I
I
think
was very much
secretly,
like every party, every day, every person I meet on the street, every store owner I shop at, like I wanted to know everybody.
I
And I
think
have no idea why.
I think internally that changed when you moved to BC, um, specifically in the last year that you were there, because you started noticing that the people that you had around just didn't seem to give you the same um, exploratory, real like concrete relationships that you were needing, and you could just go. I could just tell you were just getting worn out from the amount of constant upkeep with all of those situations and all of those people.
That's sort of what I find interesting though, is because it used to invigorate me. Like I used to be so exhausted until I went out, and then within a matter of what 2 or 3 years, I guess we met
Yeah.
in our teens, so early 20s, and then it flipped to the
What?
opposite where I didn't have the time for anyone else other than my
Yeah.
close friends.
What was the year that we actually moved? I can't ever remember.
2006 to 2008,
2006. So I would have been, yeah, like
2021.
23. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, ish.
22, 20. Because we moved in January. So I would have been 22 still. That makes sense. Hmm.
Yeah, so I find it interesting the evolution of people's needs actually changes too. So it's a lot to speak when somebody meets somebody young or at any age really. If there's always the potential of evolving into a completely separate type of personality, it seems really hard to keep long-term friendships with that potentiality constantly looming. Because like I mean, it could happen again when I'm 60, right? As a senior, I might just want tons of friends and want to know everybody in my neighborhood all over again like I used to.
Yeah, I doubt it.
So like with people generally though, when they're meeting other people, I guess putting a time frame on it, like every time you meet somebody and develop a bond with them, the expectation basically should never be there that it's going to be long term, and that should be okay. I guess that's sort of what I'm getting at. And that's something I think I've learned, but I'm not sure that it's accurate. Like
Hmm.
going into starting a friendship or forming a bond or something like that, um, I think it's more natural to assume that any energy you're putting into the person directly in front of you is going to be a long lasting, long term, permanent benefit to you in your fulfillment in life kind of thing, like a partnership, right? because generally you wouldn't invest energy into something that's not going to give back to you. But it seems
Well,
almost really pessimistic and jaded to consider going into a friendship and forming a bond with somebody and expecting that it's not going to last long, when it seems more realistic that we should just accept the fact that the friendship might not last, but that's still worthwhile, that it's still a
you
good
know,
friendship to have.
that speaks a lot to, I don't know if you remember way back in the day where I used to say, I would give 50% to someone to start out, and it slowly went down to 25 and then to 15 and then to no expectations. So at this point in time, if I, let's say, met someone tomorrow and we hit it off as friends, they just were super cool, whatever, chill, whatever, I have zero expectations of them, zero, because I don't feel that people, at this stage in the game anyway, frankly, and as meeting new people and stuff like that, I just don't feel like I would have the energy to commit to making a whole new friendship all over again. It takes so long to get to that point, where you can just, yeah, you can have coffee and stuff, but it takes so long to get to. I mean, where we are, just for the audience out there, I mean, we are at what, 16 years,
Yeah,
something
ish.
like that,
Yeah,
15, 6, somewhere in there.
half
And
our
of those,
lives basically.
basically, and of that time, I can't even tell you how many changes and addresses and life changes we've gone through to get to this point. So it's just even exhausting to think about committing it all over again to somebody else.
So to put it back on the other individuals, maybe not specifically us, because
Okay.
we're
Yeah.
possibly aberrations, but possibly statistical blips.
Sure.
But putting on for other people, it might make sense then with that frame of mind or that insight in mind from the onset, we might consider that having a whole bunch of friends on the side burners just stewing over years would help us be able to choose which ones we wanted to keep for long term. So it almost itself lends to the complete opposite of having more friends than you'd like just so that you have enough when you want them down the road. But at the same time, it's like the opposite of what you're trying to accomplish by having only a few long-term friends, right? And at the same time, we are acknowledging that you can't expect the friend you meet today to be a long-term friend because people change. So how do we sort of juggle all of that?
It's just, you can't really. It's really just up to. I wouldn't say it's completely up to chance. I mean, it's not a lottery of someone choosing to be your friend or not. But I mean, like in the lottery of life, I think certainly things change. People move. People get married, have kids, whatever. I mean, you can't. I just like. I feel like if people are just keeping other people in the background for the sake of, okay, maybe this one main one won't work out anymore in a year from now, or something bad happened between you. Okay, well, I'll just talk to Mike over here or Joe or whoever now. And I think that's a little,
Yeah, it feels really dirty almost, like you're cheating on everybody.
yeah, which is why I think that the idea of polyamory as a friendship, is just so interesting, because like that's basically what those people do, is like when they're upset with Johnny over here, they'll move over to Joe and they'll talk to them. And then if they're bored with them, they'll talk to this person. And you know what I mean? So
Do you
those
think that's
people
a healthy way, though, to have relationships like that? Because then you're not
I don't know.
depending on any one person. You're sort of depending on the people who can best handle it.
See, I think you're conflicted in your idea of how a friendship works. And because I don't feel like I need to depend on someone for friendship. I just feel that we both contribute. Talking about that meeting halfway point, I don't think there's like I depend on you at the end of the day. I rely on certain aspects that I can talk to you about a lot of stuff. I trust your opinions and your judgments, and I trust that you're not going to judge me for what I'm saying. But to say that I depend on people, I've never depended on anyone. It's
Well,
just it's
the
always
sense of
happened.
dependence, I mean, is sort of like Maslow's hierarchy dependence, in the sense that you can't have company on your own. You depend on another person to be in
Well,
company.
okay,
I
in
don't
that
mean depend
standpoint.
as in I need you for food, I need you to wash
Okay,
me, I need
okay.
you
Sorry, I took
to.
that too literally.
No, I wasn't specific. I'm glad you pointed that out. That's
Hmm.
helpful. but in keeping with the context of dependence as just like a human need or a basic need, and I'm trying to think of different ways that people can manage relationships in general, not even just friendships, but like romantic or family or anything like that. Because we all know we've had grandmothers in the past, and it's hard to like put time aside from your day just to keep them company for a few minutes, right? Just the
Hmm.
simple things, even with family, is hard to, I guess, going back to the balance. And we talk about that a lot on the show with like the Buddhism and the moderation is key. And but moderating friendships is so intangible. It's qualitative. You can't measure it. There is no way to sort of find a middle when there's no numbers, there's no range. So how does a person go about like figuring out what their balance is and communicating that to prospective incumbent partners?
Mm, I
Like,
would
how should we
say,
manage ourselves, basically?
yeah. I would say you kind of have to be like a referee in your own life, I guess. Like this person lives up to my qualities that I admire or look for in another person, and if they don't, then they don't. And that's how I think everyone should be, but ultimately people just have shitty friends sometimes.
Do you think it's
um,
helpful to like try the extremes, like to dedicate 6 months of your life to just going hard and partying, and then dedicating 6 months of your life to being completely solo and just
no, I think that's unhealthy. I think that you're just trying to be a chameleon. Then, like I'm like this with one person, but then with my other friend, I'm like this totally other person. That's not,
no,
I
but
don't think
like
that's
for
a good thing
self
either.
development to understand what you need yourself? Do you think it would be helpful to force yourself into both extremes and then find your balance that way? Like, how else do you find middle ground without knowing the
I
extent
mean,
of reach?
in in some regards you do have to test waters. I mean, I think what you're saying in extremes isn't healthy, and I don't think that's what people naturally would do, but you definitely have to test different kinds of aspects of relationships to see, okay, I like this, but this person does this too much and I don't think that's healthy or good, or I don't agree with it or whatever. So like with every new person, especially in your formative years, high school, especially early 20s, when you're really developing your idea of self and your ideologies, opinions, and everything, I think it's really necessary to kind of dip your toes in the water. But in terms of like, oh, I'm going to be a hardcore partier because this person parties, I mean, like that's how people land up with people who do drugs. That's how people land up with people who associate with cutting and that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying those are the only types of people you're going to find, but I mean those extremes. That's where you find the fringes of where you had good people in this circle, and then you're kind of going on the outside to, and
Yeah,
that's where you're
that's
going
sort
to
of
find
why I
all
was
those kind of
thinking of
people.
limiting it to a time frame, saying for 6 months I'll do this and see
Mm-hmm.
how much I
Mm-hmm.
like, and then for 6 months I'll do this and see how much I like that. Just
Yeah.
as a form of like a baseline to find out what your borders are. Because like my extreme will be different from another person's extreme, and another person might want to jump off skyscrapers, and I'm only happy jumping off trees, and other people don't jump
Yeah.
off trees, right?
Yeah. No,
So
like I said, just dipping your toes in. I think everyone naturally does that anyway,
yeah, I
subconsciously
guess
even. I don't think they even think about it, but
I don't think they do either. I think it's just like a natural way that we go about. I'm wondering if we can impose some volition into it though, like speed up the process or make it more efficient. Is there a way to develop relationships more efficiently than just trial and error to see what we like and don't like?
I don't think so. I really don't think there's any kind of, you know, clinical way of expediting a friendship. I mean, it's just it has to. I'm gonna backpedal a little bit from what I said earlier. I think actually a friendship has to be half consistency and half organic. I think that's more realistic.
That sounds nice too because it keeps it fresh. It doesn't
Right.
go stale.
Mm. Because there's going to be new things that you both come across in your own lives, and there's going to be those commonalities that you can keep going off of.
Yeah, so with that in mind, maybe I'll segue into we talked a little bit about like maintenance of friendships and relationships and partners and things like that. What about healthy ways of parting ways? a really common thing these days I keep hearing about is ghosting, and I'm probably too old to have experienced it, but because like texting wasn't even a thing when I was a kid. But
Oh, I know.
what do you think about ways
I
of being honest with other people about breaking friendships or cutting ties or loosening the slack, even not even just cutting them off, but just saying like, hey, I need more space. We're not going to be as close as you'd like, but we can still keep in touch. You still got a place to stay if you're out of, you know what I mean? Like, what about downgrading friendships, basically?
I mean, I don't think there's any reasonable way to do it. Ghosting people is pretty vacant. I mean, especially if you've known the person for a couple of years, I think that's a pretty shitty way of saying, we're done. You could just say something instead of just being a dick.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't agree with that completely, but I also don't agree with physically telling someone, "Hey, I need my space and you're too much." Like I think that's almost hurtful to them because they don't understand where you're coming from with that. So I think there has to be like a middle ground where you don't have to necessarily say that you're too much of a whatever for me or that I need space from you or whatever. But
But it should be
that's
communicated,
tricky.
right?
It should be, but only in very simple terms where I feel like the other person would be, okay, I totally get that. It wouldn't have anything to do with feelings. You'd have to take the feelings out of it. That's the most complicated part of it.
Yeah, I think
Because the
so
second
too.
you put feelings on anything, that's when people get hurt, and that's when people don't understand because they take it personally automatically. Yeah.
That's actually a good line to move into abusive relationships. And I don't mean, I mean, obviously punching people is stupid.
Right.
But I
Right.
mean,
And
like
you're talking.
that subtle passive aggressive abusive or like gaslighting or
Could
the
you
heavy sighs and that kind of
could
thing.
you define gaslighting then? I'm not
Oh,
really familiar with
yeah,
that.
that's like making somebody think there's a problem that isn't there. So like,
Okay.
oh, you forgot to do the door again, like lock the door again. They're like, what? I didn't lock the door. And then you keep reminding them that they didn't lock, even though they did. So then they start thinking that they have a problem of not locking the door, something like that.
Weird. Interesting.
Like spouses do it a lot to each other too. Like when they're arguing about something, if they feel like they've done something wrong, they might look for a fault in the other person and create one out of thin air and make them think that they had it. I'm not
Right.
explaining it very well. Maybe I should just look it up.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. From what you're saying, it makes sense. So
Yeah.
what is the question though? What do I think about?
Well, like I'm sort of torn here because I think abusive people, first of all, should just be alone. They deserve it. Until
Hmm,
they learn to not abuse other people, they deserve to just be alone. But with that in mind, people have disorders and sicknesses, and I don't think it's right to say that just because somebody's a little bit unstable that they deserve to be alone. Like that's not really fair because they're born that way. It would be like saying somebody who's short doesn't deserve to play basketball. Like
right,
they can still
right.
play. Like it shouldn't be. So
They're never going to make the NBA, but
yeah, yeah. So like the zero tolerance attitude I have toward abuse. I mean, it might be just a personal thing for me. Like I refuse to accept abuse from anyone, and I don't think any woman should accept abuse just because of the power structure is different physically. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So I think there's actually more risk to a woman being abused than there is risk to a man being abused. But that in and of itself is sexist too. So I'm like, I'm conflicted with prejudice as well as personal preference as well as rational thought. But rationally, I know that there's scientific medical conditions that cause people to be irritable or agitated or aggressive or, you know what I mean? So what are your thoughts on like dealing with subtle abuses? Like,
oh boy, this is a loaded topic. Well,
we'll start with
considering
friendships too, because we don't have to get too complicated right off the
right,
bat.
right. Well, considering that you're talking to someone with some of those problems, not with the abusing other people, but having problems in regards to um, conflict. Let's just say conflict as a broad term that encapsulate a lot of different things. I feel that that kind of abuse, especially that either whether it be passive aggressive, condescending, what you mentioned with the gaslighting. Uh, I don't necessarily have a zero tolerance with abuse in general because not to say that abuse is not bad because it is. It's
Yeah,
horrible.
exactly.
You can't, and no one can ever tell me that abuse is a good thing. But there's reasons why people react and they act the way they do, uh, and it justified in their own mind. And I'm not saying that I'm saying, if I see abuse and I'm like, nah, whatever, it happens. Like, no, obviously
Yeah.
it's a bad thing. I'm going to point it out, but at the end of the day, it's there are reasons behind everything that people do. It's not just like, so I don't think that's examined enough. You just see abuse and you don't even question why it's happening or what happened to this person. I'm not going into the whole victim thing either, but because that's a whole nother thing I don't even want to broach. But I just don't think there's enough uh, digging into the situation of abuse in general and why it's happening in the first place. All we're looking at is the symptom of the abuse. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like ignoring the cause and the source and the everything that built up to create it.
Again, not a proponent for abuse at all.
No,
I
not at
don't
all.
believe in it,
No.
not even in the slightest. It's a horrible, horrible thing
And if
from
anything,
a,
I'm leaning towards the intolerant side of it, just completely
yes,
being against it.
I
If
totally am as
when
well.
in doubt, intolerant.
Yeah.
But like as a
Um,
consequence of knowledge, like this is a whole forbidden fruit thing from the Garden of Eden. Like once you're aware that people have psychological disorders and they must exist, otherwise those disorders wouldn't exist,
right.
it doesn't justify people's actions, but understanding their
No.
actions makes it less, hopefully it makes it less damaging. So I'm wondering if maybe some people are more resistant to certain types of abuses, and maybe, and this is just hypothesizing for the sake of exploring thought, but maybe people find partners and comfort with people whose accidental or incidental abuses are the types that they're most resistant to just by their personality. So
Hmm.
maybe it's not so much about love and connection as it is about,
How
oh,
much
this is the
shit
worst
they
they
can
got. I can
handle.
totally deal with that. You know what I
Uh,
mean?
yeah. I
Like,
mean,
like you
everyone
handle my cynicism with a sense of humor. Not everybody does. Some people have really
take it
hated being
literally.
around me and close because they like I sound negative. But to me, it's funny. Irony is hilarious. But I
That's
can see
because they
where they're
don't.
coming from.
Yeah. Well, of course, it does. That's because they're not looking far enough into reading between the lines.
Yeah,
You can't just say one person says this, therefore they feel like that. It's like, no, there's like 10 different thoughts behind what people are saying. You're just taking it way too black and white, and that's where people run into that kind of problem. And I'm saying on a general kind of sense, not just you.
yeah.
People
But
are
I think
way too
maybe you're
black and
more
white.
resistant to my types of abuses, is what I'm getting at. And maybe I'm more resistant to your types of abuses, and that's why we're better friends than we are with, say, Joe Blow down the street or
Right.
Jane in Black.
Yeah, I mean, you might be onto something that does make sense. I was also going off of that topic. I was also thinking the other day about how when people have, let's say, I don't know, any, like you were saying, any kind of disorder, and why other people don't suffer from the same thing, even though they have symptoms of it, is because of that tolerance in their brain and the way that it's structured. I don't see some of that. I don't think has anything to do with child rearing at all. I think it's just the way that people's brains form in the womb and in childbirth and all that kind of stuff. I don't think it has anything to do with the nurturing side. I think it's just all nature in that regard that you're specifically talking about with dealing, having a higher threshold of tolerance for that kind
Yeah.
of thing,
Because
whether
like
you
having a
know it or
thick
not.
skin isn't a thick skin about everything. It's usually
No, no.
about people
Uh,
calling you an asshole, or you have a thick skin about people using swear words.
right.
Curse a lot.
Curse words.
Curse words, yes. See,
I
I've
mean,
been
like I
cursing
have.
since I was a little kid, and actually, some people really hate it. Like I try not to swear around my mother because she just doesn't like to hear it, and
Yeah, me either. Yeah, yeah,
it's not
yeah.
respectful of me to do it. But when I slip, it's not the end of the world because she knows I'm not doing it intentionally, kind of thing, right?
I mean, I swear a hell of a lot more in front of my dad and my stepmom than I do in front of my mom because I know my dad doesn't care
Yeah,
as
yeah,
much as my mom. Um, but yeah, no, I definitely think that there's something to be said about that. The going back to your tolerance of and your threshold, because like let's just say example, like somebody works in an industry where they will put up with a lot of abuse from people. It doesn't matter, retail, serving, even some, office jobs. I mean, some bosses are just really shitty and they just put up with the abuse or whatever. But I'm just wondering if the tolerance in those instances gives you that tolerance, or it eventually wears you out of it. That's where I'm kind of like, I don't really understand how people's tolerance level works, because like I feel like over time that shit wears on you. It doesn't matter who you are. I think it just wears and wears and wears on you before you just can't do it anymore. Other people are really, really resilient and they never had a problem with it, and they just shrug it off, laugh it off, I don't care, whatever. And I really envy those people, but at the same time I wonder, are those the same type of people that are emotionally shallow, that don't consider other people's viewpoints, that aren't empathetic? Are those the type of people that I'm subconsciously avoiding because I know
you
that,
sort of get skeptical about their repression.
ability.
How much are you repressing in saying
Exactly.
that doesn't bother you? And I bet you they probably couldn't tell you honestly either, because like if I try and think about what I might be repressing, like it's inherently hidden. That's what repression is. Like,
well, yeah.
So it's just kind of a funny cyclical. I love recursion. It just tickles my brain. So, did you have anything else to?
No, I was just about that tolerance thought that you had.
So I just want to maybe take one more shovel at it. So we're talking a bit about having a thick skin and people's inadvertent abuses, like accidental slights and maybe like rolling your eyes at somebody or not wanting to listen to them, like they don't feel heard or validated in some way. To some people, that might be really difficult to deal with emotionally, and it's so hurtful, but they care about the other person enough that they think they can stay with them despite it. Is it reasonable, do you think, from one person to expect another person to change even if they agree to changing? I'm not saying like I'm changing you, but saying like I need you to stop this because it hurts me. How do you find a balance there between friends?
I don't think people have the ability to change without help. And if someone says they're going to change, they're never going to unless they actually actively seek the help they need. Whether it's because they were abused themselves as children, or whatever the situation is, doesn't matter. There's a million different things that could have caused it. But if you're in a relationship and someone keeps saying, oh, I'm going to change, I'm going to change, I'm going to change, you keep waiting and waiting and waiting because you're holding on to that love and to that, you don't want to give up on them because you still, trust them and respect them and all that kind of stuff. You're just sinking your own ship. I don't think there's any way that that's ever going to change.
But if somebody,
I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but not like 98% of the time. What's up?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, there's just a lag on that.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if somebody's doing it not repeatedly, but they're saying, like, I want to change and this is the first instance, is it even reasonable? Just like as a philosophical question, is it reasonable to expect somebody to change, even though they agreed to it and want to do it, to change for you?
No.
Like, should we even have that expectation ever?
Unless it's like a really dire situation, I think that's really selfish. I don't think you should ask someone to change for you. That means that they're going to be someone else that they're not. That doesn't make any sense.
But, like, let's say hypothetically, okay, if every time I talk to you, you didn't want to hear the things that I wanted to talk about. So let's say that I asked you, even if you don't care, I need you to hear me out and pretend like you care, just because it helps me. A lot. It means a lot to me, and it's a little.
Well, if that's a compromise, then I would be willing to compromise for something like that. If that's what you're talking about.
But I would ask though, is that even reasonable? Because if you care about the person as they are and you love them unconditionally, like even as just friends,
right?
It sounds hypocritical to expect anything, even if they agree to it and promise it and want to do it, and it's in their best interest and it'll make them a better person. Just by mere fact of the thought of saying you should do this. I'm
forcing you to do this
life
for me
slightly differently just for me.
I mean, that's where you get into the whole nitty gritty of like, what does your friendship mean to you then? And how much does this person actually mean to you? Because if you're willing to do that, then I think that is a good relationship. I don't think that you should be In my instance, I was saying more of like an extreme case of like
Yeah.
abuse or something like that. But if you're talking about like, if someone's really in a lot of pain about something, and even though you don't understand, but you have this like respect and all that kind of, I think that should be an expectation of you to put your cards down and help them out with that. It doesn't matter if you care or not. I think that's just a respect thing. I don't think that has anything to do with forcing someone to do something they don't want to do. I think that's out of respect that you do it.
Well put. And I was
Yeah.
going to ask you about the abuse thing. I was going to escalate to it, but you beat me to it. So I'll skip past that. I do want to get to family and love a bit. I'm not sure where you think the better segue would be, to start with romance or to start with pure blood family. I'll let you decide.
Let's go with the romance first and then family, because I think families should be more important than a frivolous relationship like that.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask you then. Like, I've never been married. You've never been married. We're not going to talk about marriage because that would be just ignorant on ignorant. But on relationships, like, we've been in relationships where we've considered marriage before, at least considered it, even if only slightly.
Right.
I know I
Right.
have several times. With that, the commitment for long term, and as we talked about before, how people are almost guaranteed to change in some ways. A lot of
Mm.
people grow together, and that's absolutely beautiful and astounding, and I love seeing it. But for the people who start to grow apart, like, how much extra effort is merited? Like, how much do you think people should force just from having time and made the commitment and made the vow, and just on a totally superficial level? Is it reasonable, again, to suggest that in all instances it must work because we've dedicated, like, is that commitment part of the love? Like,
Sorry,
that,
you said the vow. Are you talking about marriage at this point? Or are you just saying like a regular uh relationship?
I mean, a regular relationship, but like,
Okay, no
when you're
marriage
with
at all.
somebody
Okay.
long enough, common law, you basically have a vow to always be there for them, and you know what I mean? Like,
Okay, well, I mean, if you're getting as far as common law, I mean that's where it gets really tricky. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about how to deal with breaking up with people. But at that point, when you're having those issues, and if you feel you've drifted apart, I mean, I hate to be jaded, but I feel like I would just cut my losses. I mean, there are times when, yeah, we can just have a talk about it. Hey, like, I feel like we're drifting apart. I don't really know who you are anymore. We don't talk anymore, blah, blah, blah. And then maybe the person's like, oh my God, me too. I'm so glad we had this talk. And now we feel
yeah, that
closer
should
again.
definitely
And
be first course of action.
you kind of rope them back into the relationship. But I mean, like, if you're already had those talks and you still feel the same way, or the other person is, God forbid, cheating on you or whatever, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's relationships are complicated. It's not like, especially when you throw sex into the mix and all that. Oh my God,
How
forget
much of
about
that
it.
do you think the promise factors in, though? Once you've made that sort of promise and commitment to someone, does that make you have to put in more effort, or have to stay longer, or try
Yeah, and
harder?
that goes back exactly what the friendship is like. That's because of the respect level, because of the trust level, because of the commitment level. At that point, if you're talking about common law, I absolutely 100% think it should be, you are now committed. This is what you're going to work on. If you don't see it happening, then you need to tell that person, like, today.
And you need to keep trying, though, right? Like, the
Yes.
communication is just
I mean,
part of
as long as
building
the
the relationship.
relationship seems like it is worthwhile, for sure. Like, if it's just like the other person's just getting like turning into a shitty person, and obviously you got to cut it out. But I mean, yeah, no, I definitely think that my traditional sense of how a relationship should be, very traditional, by the way, uh, you should try recommitting yourself first and foremost to try and make it work, because otherwise you're just wasting both your time.
Yeah, the seed that planted that thought for me was, just from movies and stories and books or whatever. Common conflict between characters is that growing apart thing, where there's a distance, but it's caused by something that's only temporary, right? Like, maybe it's an alcohol addiction or something, and then they get over it, but it takes months, right?
For
how
years.
long do you put in that effort because of the promise that you made? Like when I say I'm going to stand by you, it's almost without strings attached, but it can't, you can't just drag somebody through life forever
No,
because they made a promise, right? So
like if
where do you draw that
it,
line basically? Where's that gray area?
well, that's where your tolerance threshold comes in. You know, if you feel that like you've maxed out your tolerance and they're still addicted to meth or they're still gambling or whatever other thing that they're going through personally that you're trying to help them with and they have tried to quit over and over, or they're trying to, if they're trying to honestly like deal with it and stop the behavior and to, then for sure I would try to be there for them. But if they're just struggling so much with it that it's ruining their life and their relationships, including mine, I'm sorry, like I'm not married to you. If I was married to you, big fucking difference, but I'm not. So at this point, I'm gonna try and get you the help you need if you're willing to accept it. But other than that, I'm not gonna put up with that kind of thing.
And just for the record, you and I both subscribe to the absolutism of marriage, right? Like once you're married, that person is everything, unless at the
Hopefully
very,
for life, it's a
yeah.
lifelong commitment.
I mean, unless it's completely dire, like they turn into some crazy homicidal pedophile
Well,
or
yeah, of
something like
course, there
that.
are
But
limits to.
yeah,
I mean, that's why we have divorce after all, but I don't believe that 50%, 60%, whatever it is right now, is even close to where it should be. It should be like 5%.
yeah.
Rare instances where they're abusive, there was a suicide, something forced you out of a marriage. That should
Yeah.
be when it's the
Like when
5%.
your health is at risk, or your children are at risk, or your finances, like
Yes,
your future
yes.
is at risk.
Or if you're diagnosed with cancer, you can't do anything about that. Of course, you're going to have to. But if it's not something like that, then it should be 100% till you're 75, past, passed away, whatever. Like that's what marriage is. And I don't know why it's not anymore. And I have a lot of feeling that it has to do with religion not being involved in our lives at all anymore. And these things, these phones are completely taking over our faith in anything. It's disgusting sometimes to me, but
Oh, you're
at the
touching
same
on
time, I'm horribly addicted. So,
you're actually touching on a lot of really juicy stuff there. So like,
oh, sorry.
no, 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 that's good. I'm
Oh,
encouraging you.
okay.
So, uh, in those circumstances, though, like, speak more about when, like, how religion, for example, has affected our social use of the divorce mechanism, the legal
Well,
divorce mechanism.
I mean, just as recent as the 50s or 60s, it was a faux pas, huge faux pas to be living with somebody. Three's Company is a perfect example of that. That was a
Yeah.
huge like thing when that show came out. It was like, oh, you can't talk about that. Jack was gay. That was another big thing on the show. Like, obviously, he wasn't gay, but his landlord thought he was. But I mean, like for sure, if the with the absence of something stable and fundamental like religion and a belief in something, what else do people have? Life is meaningless otherwise. If you have no belief in anything or any kind of faith in anything outside of yourself and your selfish little world and your little phone and your little circle of, Instagram friends and shit, you have absolutely no purpose as far as I'm concerned. And when you strip that out of our society, which has been done slowly but surely over time, what does a marriage mean then? It's not under the eyes of God. It's under the eyes of me and you and 100 of our Facebook friends. It doesn't matter nearly as much anymore. It's just saying, I think you're hot now, but do I want to stick around 10 years from now when you've kind of got older and fatter and you've had a couple of kids from me? And no, not really. I'll just find someone younger afterwards. It's not that big of a deal. And yeah,
You
there's a
think that's
lot of
what's
people.
contributing to the 50% divorce rate, though? Is
Well, I mean, there's a lot of factors. The economy, like I said, people's addiction to technology. Porn is another big one, because
that's
that's like
huge, yeah.
huge. Like, can you imagine learning about sex ed from porn
I
as
did.
as opposed to, okay, well, I didn't, but I relied on
Very
school for that.
unfortunate.
But I just like kids' idea of like relationships and sex and the sanctity of marriage is just like this like far off. It's in the history books now. It's not even like something we even,
And it's everything about like even how people conduct sex. Like nobody would have thought to sit there and start tapping a woman like until they see it on porn and think that that's what you do.
or like grab someone's nipple and start
Yeah,
ripping it
yeah.
out. Like that's not sexy. That hurts. Chicks don't like that. It's painful, and
Like a lot of like what's in the movie is just to for show, right? Like
yeah.
if kids are learning or even adults are learning to have sex in a way that is done just theatrically like porn, I think that's really going to hazardously affect people's romantic relationships because sex is a really strong way of two people connecting together, right? Like that's part of that romantic bond that leads to marriage. Not that all sex leads to marriage, but like you have to generally find someone sexually attractive before you marry them.
Wait. Hold up. You said sex, right? I think I vaguely remember how that feels.
I got a video I'll show you.
Let's just say the last time I had sex, I didn't have gray hair. How about that? Like,
And I had hair.
yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Uh,
Well, moving on from sex to family.
right. Okay. Nice
Awesome
segue.
segue. What about like the relationships and bonds between like brothers and sisters, mothers and kin, grandmothers, nieces, nephews, cousins? They're all kind of different, right? Like if a cousin dies, it's not the same as a sister dying or your mother dying or your grandmother dying, but they're all devastating. How are our social bonds relating to our devastation? Like, why is there a difference?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think first of all, it would have to do with who raised you, grandma, mom, auntie, uncle, whatever. Secondly, I mean, it depends who in your family you chose to be closest to for how much long. I choose to be closer with my um, sister than I am with my parents, but it's because she's my age, for one, and my parents and me didn't really have a good relationship growing up either, so that kind of contributed to our lack of any kind of meaningful
So your
connection now.
friendship with your parents now is just younger, basically, than your relationship with your sister because you grew up with her.
Uh, I don't think you'd say it's not matured. I mean, like it's had the time to do that. I just it's just one of those relationships I haven't personally put in the commitment because I just haven't seen it worthwhile. As sad as that is to say, because like this is exactly what I was talking with you yesterday about of that obligatory relationship, because that is obligatory with your family. Like no matter how you look at it, like you're born into your mom and dad with your siblings if they choose to have them. You're born into whoever you have for aunts and uncles. You have no choice in that. It's so the to say that, yeah, I would be devastated if my mom died. Of course I would. Anyone would who wasn't a complete sociopath.
Yeah, yeah.
But to say that I would be totally remiss of the relationship I'd be missing out on, I mean, like, yeah, but no, because I don't really have one. I would be devastated with it happening. I would be mournful. I would have mourning for probably, a year. I don't know how long that's supposed to last for. I've never really had to deal with a very close one, but I would move on. And if people asked about it, I would be sad about it, but it just would happen and I would move on.
Do you
And I
think
know
it's
that
even
sounds
fair
jaded,
then
but
to compare bonds between people? That's sort of what I wanted to get to because it is a hard
well,
question to answer because like to
I
say
don't
it
think
out
it is.
loud sounds wrong because that's not
It
how you
does.
actually feel.
I don't think that it's fair to compare your bond with your mom or your dad or your family to mine, because it's different, like my bond with your parents is different from my parents even.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's just different. We
And
have a different dynamic and whatever. So
and just to emphasize that a little bit more so that nobody gets the wrong impression, I think what we're saying is that they're different and that's okay. Like it's not
right.
like they're different, so this one's better or worse. Like
Right.
they're not comparably different. That's sort of what I wanted to get at with that.
And I think going off of that topic, I think that's a very important point to make in a general sense, that people are way too used to comparing yourself to other people when in fact you cannot compare yourself to other people because
Exactly.
you're different, I'm different. all these people are different from you for all of these types of reasons, and you can never say, oh, I wish I had that, or whatever the case is. You just can't do that. Everyone has to get out of that Instagram mentality.
That best
It's
friend
really
mentality, right?
the best friend mentality. What's that?
We're like, this is my best friend, that's my second best friend, that's my third best
Well,
friend.
that's unhealthy too. I don't think that's fair that you have a friendship
Yeah,
hierarchy either.
yeah,
It's,
exactly.
it's like, because no matter what, there's going to be that one Joe Schmo on the bottom of the totem pole, and that's not very nice at all. That was
That's the
actually I
string
had
I
that
hang
friend
on
when
to
I
in
was.
most people's hierarchies.
That's who my close friend when I was a kid. Actually, we had a hierarchy of friends. It was super unfair.
But I hear a lot of
Uh,
people do that. Like even as full-grown adults, they don't sort of realize the complete difference between relationships, even from one friend to another friend. Never mind parents and siblings. But I want to emphasize that too. What we're talking here is about abolishing the idea of the friendship hierarchy, or even any
yeah,
hierarchy, because it's just not comparable. Like you
it's
might say
not.
you
It's
love your
not.
wife more than your friend, but you might actually love your best friend a lot, like a lot, a lot.
Yeah, but the fact of the remains is that since you brought up marriage, and I'm not speaking to marriage because we said
Yeah.
earlier we have not been married, so let's just make
Oh,
that
we've
straight.
already done full disclosure.
Yeah. But you can't compare a best friend to your wife because it's not even in the same ballpark. Your wife is your life partner. Your best friend is your hetero life partner,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term. Thank you, Kevin Smith. Uh, but you just can't compare it. I don't think that's even a fair thing to do, because the dynamic is totally different. You're not having sex with your best friend. You're having sex with your wife. You're not telling your wife your darkest, deepest secrets. You're telling your best friend. It's not the same. Well, I wouldn't anyway. I just
Yeah.
my wife is my wife, and I will definitely talk to her about a lot of stuff. But the really, really nitty gritty shit that I just don't think she would. Anyway, that's
But even
that's
that's
just me.
person to person, right? Like some people might
Of
want their
course, of
wife to be
course.
their one and all, and some people might want
Yeah,
their mother to be their one and all. And you know what I mean? Like that's why
yeah,
I think it can't be compared. And I think people
yeah.
need to stop treating relationships as if they're measurable because they're not.
No, they're not. Like I said, the dynamics are just not the same at all. You know, it's just not. At the end of the day, it's all different. It's
Well,
a
I'm going to have a bit of a Jerry Springer moment here and ask if you've got any final thoughts before we wrap up.
uh, I think we covered everything. I mean, there's probably topics that we could broach at this point as offshoots, but I think we were okay to cut it off at this point.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your insight and perspective and expertise. Hope
My
to have you back
expertise.
again.
I went to the school of life, man. Hard knocks. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for having me as a guest. I appreciate the your time, and be well, everyone.
Likewise, welcome back. You've been listening to Frivolous Gravitas. Take care.
Thanks.